Alright guys, welcome back to Lifetime Angler. So here's the deal guys. I've always loved crappie fishing, but I've always been jealous of the guys, and you know who I'm talking about. They come out, they got these big old full stringers. They've been out on the water a couple hours. Me, I go out all day, all night, and I bring 4, 5, 6 fish back in. I mean, I can eat on that, but I've got a wife, 2 kids, another one on the way. 6 fish don't feed us no more. So the last 3 years or so, I've gotten really intentional, really purposeful, I guess is what you'd call it, on learning how to be effective while catching crappie. What do I need to know? What things make a difference? How are these guys bringing these big old stringers in? Today, that's what we're going to do. It doesn't matter if you like crappie fishing for the fun of it, for the meat side of it, or if you're just out there for tournaments and having a blast like that, trying to make a living doing it. No matter what it is, today what I'm doing is I'm taking everything I've learned over these past 3 years and even prior to that, and I'm going to try to pack it all into this video. Hey guys, so we're going to pack a bunch of information into today's video. It's going to be a lot longer than the typical video I've been doing, so what I'm going to recommend you do, I'm going to recommend you save or you bookmark this video. That way you can come back to it time and time again if there's something you forget or something you need to revisit, or hey, if you're like me and you got a busy life, this is way too much to sit down and watch all in one go. Watch a little bit now while you got time. Come back to it later when you got time again. Anyway, let's get at her. I don't know how much I'm going to edit this video. This might just be an hour, 2 hours of me rambling along. I've got my coffee, so I'm in for the long haul. Got to excuse the coffee break there. Bear with my voice as we go, because all week my allergies and sinuses have been kicking my tail in. So it's a miracle I can even talk right now. But I'll show you this. I've got all my notes, including what my kids have drawn on, all of that. Guys, this video I've been working on prep and everything that I want to get through, and what I think a crappie angler, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or even an advanced guy, what's the most useful knowledge that's going to help you go out there on the water and take your fishing to the next level. So like I said, it's been about a week and a half worth of work. This is kind of the outline I've come up with. To give you a rundown, today we're going to go over gear for crappie fishing. That'd be rods, reels, all sorts of stuff like that. What line, braid, mono, yada yada. We're going to go over baits. With baits, we're going to talk about the different types of them, your sizes, colors. Go over the techniques. You know, me personally, I'm a big single jig fan. There's plenty of people that love trolling. You can spot a rig, you can do this, you can push, you can pull, you can troll, you can sideways pull, whatever that means, man. I'm sure someone out there's got a boat flipped upside down and still somehow catching crappie. That's just the way it rolls. So we're going to go over some of the most popular techniques. We're going to go over location. What I mean by location is, where are you looking for the fish? When are you looking in those places? And what kind of tactics do you use in those locations? Because what works in one area might not work in the other area, but hey, who knows? We're going to continue to go on. Guys, none of this is useful if you don't know where the crappie are and how they move throughout the year. So we're going to talk a little bit about the time of year and how the crappies, life cycle is the wrong word, but the crappie's movement throughout the year with the changing of seasons and all of that. And then, guys, don't think I forgot it. I know everybody loves talking about electronics, so we're going to dive into that little wormhole and see if I can't tick some people off with what my opinion is. Guys, we're going to go ahead and go back. Once again, no clue how much of this I'm going to edit, so you might see a lot of me drinking coffee, you might see a lot of me looking at my notes, but y'all bear with me, hang tight, and we're going to get this going. Let's talk rods, guys. Oh, if I don't break it on the ceiling fan. So this right here is what I've been using a lot of, and a lot of people probably aren't going to consider this a crappie pole. Well, can't quite get it all in the frame, but anyway, you get the idea. It is a loose speed stick, matching speed spin reel. It is spinning for crappie. I really like the spinning combos. This one is 7 foot. It's a medium power fast action. I do like that fast action. Anyway, we'll get back to that later. It's a 7-foot medium action. It's rated for 1/8 to 1/2 ounce lure. Now, that right there ought to tell you that a lot of people don't consider that a crappie pole. 1/8, you're kind of midway to on the heavy side of crappie lures if you know anything there. But guys, that's a great all around pole. I've caught, I can't even count the number of crappie on it. That's become one of my favorite go-to multi-species poles. But let's talk. When it comes to rods, if you're not using that or you want to get a little more specific or technical than I do, what are you looking for? What do you have to have? Well, first thing, you have to have a rod and reel. That's simple. I'm a firm believer if all you got is a big old thick surf rod, man, throw a light leader on it and go fish. You're gonna catch crappie. Now, if you have something closer to light action, a little smaller, a little more finesse, yes, it's going to be easier. But first off, guys, don't let the equipment you already have keep you from getting out there and going fishing. That's number one thing, is just get out there, because you can't catch them if you're not on the water. Crappie fishing, when I think about it and I think about crappie poles, I think about longer poles. I'm a single jig fan, so that's where a lot of that comes in too. I'm going to say a medium ground for a crappie pole, 6.5 to 7 foot. Anything shorter than that's going to be guys for getting in tight quarters, shooting docks, things like that. If you're going longer than that, you're looking more, you're starting to think single jig poles, you're thinking trolling rods, things like that. Now, just because let's say you have a 9-foot jigging pole, that does not mean you can't troll with it. That does not mean you can't go out and fish a minnow with it. That doesn't mean you can't cast it. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, casting a 9-foot pole will be a bit of a pain if you're in tight quarters. Keep that in mind. But, guys, generally, find what you can. If you're just starting out, go ahead and I'd say find that 7 to 7.5 foot rod. Wouldn't go medium like what I am with this spinning combo that I've got. I would go either medium light or a light action rod, or power, not action. Action, I do like faster, extra fast. I feel like I get a better sense for what bait or what the fish that are biting are doing with it. I like that feel better. You do what you do. There's no right or wrong deal. If you're trolling, you might want something more moderate that's kind of somewhere between a fast and a slow. That if you hang up on some grass or something, it'll allow it to load up a little bit and then kind of spring it out of that grass without just ripping things apart. Hey, if you're trolling crankbaits ain't cheap, just like everything else in the world nowadays. And that's really all I'm going to say with rods. As far as reels go, guys, just pair it up to match the size of line and rod you're using. I'm going to use that to go right into line. Line sizes. I'm personally a fan of 6 pound for crappie. I like a 6 pound mono test. That's what I want towards the end of the hook 90% of the time. Now, if you're living somewhere where it's clearer waters or things like that, don't be afraid to drop to 4. Or I know guys that even use 2 pound. Hats off to them. I ain't got the patience to play a crappie out that much. I want that crappie. I want it in the boat. I want to go catch another one. But if that's more your style and you're out there just having fun and enjoying the fight with the fish, there's nothing wrong with going down to 2 pound line. Now, braid, I like 15 pound braid. Now, some people just flipped out because I'm talking crappie fishing, 15 pound line and braid. It's fine, guys. A lot of times, just like what I've got rigged up right now, I've got a 15 pound braid line. And that's going to give me more than enough strength for any sort of crappie fishing. If the water is dirty, I'll tie directly to it. Now, clearer water situations, you do want a mono leader on it, because the crappie will spook on the line. But if that water's that dirty, and you're in, the muddy Mississippi River backwaters where visibility is maybe 1.5 inches, I promise you that braid line ain't gonna matter. They ain't gonna spook from it. The other thing, if you're pitching a single jig or casting a bobber straight out into some real thick brush cover, like just nasty stuff, that line looks just like another one of them branches. So, hasn't affected my catch rates. I'm going to do it because here's the benefit to that. When I get that braided line hung up, I can pull. It'll straighten that little crappie jig hook out, and I keep my jig, I keep my bait, all that. Bend that hook back with a pair of nail nose pliers, throw it back out there, I'm back to fishing. Mono, when I'm using the 6-pound line, I get it hung up about 50-50 whether or not I'm going to be able to straighten that hook out and get that jig back, or if it's going to break off and I'm going to have to tie another jig head on. I know jig heads aren't that expensive, but guys, trust me, you lose a couple dozen in a day and it adds up, and it adds up quick. So I like to keep all of my tackle with me. I don't like breaking off and losing tackle. Alright, so real quick, I'll just kind of read off some of the notes, the pros and cons that I put for whether you should use braid or whether you should use mono. As far as visibility goes, mono's the ticket, guys. Mono's always less visible than what braid is. As far as stretch goes, so if you want a line that has a little bit of a give, you want to use mono. Braid has zero stretch. Mono has that stretch. As far as feeling small light bites, man, this is a big reason that I go braid. You can feel every little thing. You can feel if you're tapping up against a branch. You can tell the difference between a branch and a crappie breathing on that lure. I promise it's that sensitive when it comes to braid if you haven't used it before. Already talked about it, but breaking off jigs, if you want to be able to break them off, go with mono. If you want to be able to straighten that hook out, that's why I use braid. As far as memory goes, we've all been there. You see the fishing line all coiled up and everything. Guys, that's memory. The other one is castability. If you're looking to really be able to sling those jigs or sling a spinner or anything like that out there, I've always found that braid is easier to cast for distance and accuracy. Now, some of the old school braids were a bit of a pain in the butt to cast. Wasn't so much the case, but anything on the market nowadays, guys, even a cheap braid on the market now, I feel like has superior castability as compared to mono. So let's touch on fluorocarbon real quick. I don't use fluorocarbon when it comes to crappie fishing. I don't recommend it unless you're in a very, very, very specific situation. Reason being, fluorocarbon is extremely expensive, guys, as compared to either braid or mono. It can get very brittle if you get it too cold. It's just a finicky beast. There's wonderful reason to use that, and that's because it practically vanishes underwater. Now, there's the very specific situation that I'm going to say, if you're crappie fishing, use fluorocarbon. If you're out somewhere and it is just crystal clear waters and them crappie are spooking even at 2-pound mono, and you know it's the line that's causing them to be shine, break down, go get you some fluorocarbon. Try to get away with just using leader instead of reeling the whole thing up. Like I said, that stuff gets expensive in a hurry. But other than that, I really don't recommend to use fluorocarbon. I'm honestly not a huge fluorocarbon fan, regardless of what you're doing, unless you're in water that's that extremely clear to where you have to have it. What are your options when it comes to baits for crappie fishing? Well, there's the old tried and true minnows. You can use jigs, you can use crankbaits, you can use spoons, you can use spinners, you can use little roadtails, you can use just anything really. If it looks like a bait fish, a crappie is most likely going to eat it. You know, they make crappie nibbles, they make this, they make that, different power baits. Yeah, there's 100 of different options for baits when it comes to crappie. What I'm going to say is the size is more important than what the actual bait is, but pause that thought. We'll come back to size here in a minute. So let's see here. Minnows, the old standby. Let's talk about them for a second. They're called an old standby for a reason. Guys, if you're fishing with minnows, crappie are there and crappie are willing to eat, they're going to eat a minnow. Now, you might have to play with, do you need a big minnow or a little minnow? But if crappie are there, crappie are willing to eat, and you're putting that minnow at the right depth, it's going to get eaten. When I'm just give up, hey, I just want to catch a fish, I'm tired of this, my jigs aren't working, cranks aren't working, this is frustrating me, that's frustrating me, I can't put a pattern together. If I can get a hold of some minnows, I'm fishing with minnows, guys. So that's always there. Now, the downside to minnows, you gotta have some sort of bait tank or minnow bucket or some way to keep them alive. Some people don't like going through that hassle. I'm one of them. I'm lazy. If I can put a jig with a piece of plastic on there and catch 5 fish with it rather than keeping a dozen minnows live, and every time I miss a bite, the crappie just pulled them off the hook, and so I'm putting another one on there and I feel like I'm feeding ducks. Hey, but there is times, especially night fishing, a lot of times I'm using minnows over jigs and things like that. Other big advantage that you're never going to get from an artificial lure is just the lively, natural action that a minnow has. So there definitely is still a place for minnows and crappie fishing. If you're just starting out and you're not having good luck, that's immediately where I go. Personally, when it comes to hooking the minnow, there's several different ways to do it. I like to go up from the bottom jaw, out the nostril with it. I put them on a drop shot rig, but we'll go into more detail with that here in a bit. So if that's something you're interested in, just hang on while we ramble about all the other good stuff here. Crankbaits and spinnerbaits. I'm going to group this one together. These things are fantastic if you're trolling. They're fantastic, you know, if you're casting lures, things like that. If you don't have a whole lot of stuff to snag up in, because oftentimes you got treble hooks, plural, not just one, but treble hooks on them, so they can just snag on anything and everything. But if you've got some open water, these can be a great bait fish imitator. That if the crappie are active or if they're spread out, you can cover a lot of water with these and really clean up some of the active crappie there. If the crappie are kind of shut down and kind of timid, kind of slow, these aren't as good lures. But most of the time on any given lake, you can find at least a few active crappie. It's just a matter of where they are and if you're in the right place when they're in the right place and they're hungry. So, spoons, guys. Spoons is something that don't get talked about a whole lot. People think spoons, they think bass, they think ocean, walleye, ice fishing, stuff like that. There's not a lot of attention put on spoons with crappie. I'll tell you right now, that is to your advantage, because a crappie will most definitely hit a spoon. It's an easy lure that you can either be casting or trolling out and covering water horizontally, or if you decide to stop and you want to jig it, you can control that thing vertically. You can give it a little bit of motion or a lot of motion, however you choose. You can change up your flash, your color, your size, all of that. So there's a ton of stuff you can do with a spoon that a lot of people don't take advantage of. Oftentimes in real pressured lakes, I go straight to a spoon because odds are they haven't seen it. It's something different, so the pressure isn't as big of an issue at that point. Now, the big one, jigs. Jigs are simply a little piece of lead on the end of a hook. Well, now, hang on. Tackle bag's sitting out here for a reason, guys. It's so I can reach in, grab stuff, show you stuff. So we'll do that. Grab this, and we'll grab this and just bring it over here with us. So, a jig head, simply a piece of lead on the hook. They can be colored like this or any other different color. A simple jig head like this isn't the jig itself. Generally you pair that with a plastic, a minnow, or you could get what's called hair or marabou jigs. So this would be a hair, well, it's actually a marabou jig, but this has your fluffy, with your fluffy marabou on it, and that is your lure, guys. I mean, it amazes me sometimes to think that just some fluff, lead, and a wire hook and fish will eat it, but that's what a jig is. Jigs are by far my favorite. I like to pair them up with plastics on a jig head, and we'll go here. These things are awesome. So most of the time on a jig head you'll put a plastic, so this would just rig in like so, and that would be your jig all together. Again, these are slab magnets. I keep saying the wrong thing there. I absolutely love these, have a fantastic flimsy tail. Anyway, not gonna put that back up for now. Getting too far off track. Getting back to jigs. What do you need to know when it comes to jigs? One, you control them, you can cast them, you can vertically jig them, which, hey, that's where the name jig comes from. There's really, you can put them under a slip float, you can put them under a regular float, whatever you want to do with them, you can do with them. You get a wide variety of different plastics, you know, colors, shapes, sizes. You could get into hair jigs that are all sorts of different. Don't overlook ice jigs, ice fishing jigs as well when you're crappie fishing, especially when you're looking for something small. That can be something a little different that people don't see. Getting off topic again. A lot of people are gonna say it's the only real crappie lure. There's a reason they're called crappie jigs. They work fantastic for crappie. You can get them with little blades on the bottom of the jig head. So you get a little flash there, that's an underspin jig head. Like I mentioned earlier, there's crappie nibbles and things of that nature that have been made, and you can put those on the end of the hook. Some people swear by them, some people say it's worthless. You can do the same thing with minnows. Have a plastic or your marabou jig, put a minnow on it, or a lot of people will just tip it with the head or the tail of a minnow. That'll work great, kind of add some natural scent and taste to it when the crappie hit it. But hey, that's what it is. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about colors with all these baits. Color is a huge deal when it comes to crappie fishing. You can start an argument in a heartbeat about it. You can win or lose a tournament over it. You can have a wonderful day or you can have a miserable day, all based off of color. And I'm going to go ahead and bust your bubble. I really think a lot of people make too much of a fuss about it. Is there a big deal with color in crappie fishing? Yes, there is. Is it as big of an issue as what people make it out to be? No, it's not. For me, I like to stick to natural colors, blues, purples, pink, chartreuse. Chartreuse is one of my favorite. I'll throw some oranges in there and some black every now and then. But really, you don't have to always be, what's the right word? You don't have to be chasing the perfect color, because I'll tell you right now, you can have a hot pink and chartreuse plastic like this on fire 1 hour. The next hour they won't touch it. That's the perfect one. So it's always good to be experimenting, but don't get caught up in that. Something I'll always hold to: match the hatch, match the hatch, match the hatch. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be your best bet for catching quality fish. There are cases where a little bit of color can help you out, and a lot of times chartreuse is the color that I choose to use as that popping contrast. So kind of some guides. If you're in real clear water, definitely stay natural. I mean, I'm talking your white, silver, translucent, some of your black. Think about what your bait fish look like. Do they have a streak of purple on them or anything like that? When you watch those little minnows that we all watched as a kid at the dock, yeah, even as an adult, you should be paying attention to those. Do they have a little bit of a green hue to them? Okay, maybe something with some white, silver, and a little bit of green there. But in clear water, really don't go real bright, real vibrant, or anything like that. The one exception there is every now and then in clear water, a straight black plastic. Don't ask me why, but they love it. I ain't figured that science out, but if all else fails, I'll throw one out there and see if it does any better than anything else. My neck of the woods, shad's a big bait fish, so when I think clear water, when I'm in a clear water situation, I'm trying to mimic the colors of shad. So I'm thinking white, silver, gray, black, those colors right there. When you start getting into stained water, you can start adding a little bit of color, a little bit of pop to it, kind of make it stand out a little bit more visible, things like that. That's where my chartreuse comes in, a little bit more vibrant blues. My pinks come in there. Black, don't discount black. I don't know why, but black and white just work. Regardless of what you do, they work. Muddy water. Man, this is where you can get stupid bright with them, and sometimes it just does all the difference in the world. So, your bright orange, your bright green, your bright pinks again, your reds, black again, and muddy water works great. White, for some reason, will work great. I tend to actually stay away from adding a lot of flash when the water's real muddy. I add more flash the clearer the water is, the muddier the water is. I tone down the flash. Now, the exception to that is if you have something like an underspin that's going to have a blade that's rotating and it's not little flakes in your jig, they're just sparkling. And this is totally off what I did here, but sometimes those underspins and everything, that creates a vibration. So that can also help the crappie find your lure if the water's real muddy. Okay, when it comes to these baits, what's the best size for crappie fishing when it comes to a bait? I've seen 4-inch minnows. I've seen itty bitty things I could barely get a hook through them. Well, here's my general rule of thumb. I consider a crappie bait to be between 1 and 3 inches. Anything bigger, and most of the crappie that you're going to be targeting are going to be a little more skittish towards seeing that as a prey or as a food source. Anything smaller than that, man, it just gets hard to work with. It really does. My go-to crappie bait is going to be about a 1.5 inch size. And then the other one's going to be, again, I've got this sitting here. That's actually a 2-inch bait there. But those are what I'm using the most of. The way I choose my size selection for crappie lures, again, we're going to look at it this way. Match the hatch. If I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of itty bitty 1-inch ghost minnows, I'm going to go with the smaller offering first. Now, if that's not working, then I go to the opposite end of the spectrum and start working my way back. So I'm seeing 1-inch ghost minnows in the water. So I'm going to start with the 1-inch bait. Man, I'm getting no response from the crappie, no response from the crappie, no response from the crappie. Okay, instead of going to a 1.5 or a 2-inch, I'm going to jump automatically to that 3. What that does is that makes my lure stand out different from all the forage now. They didn't want it when it looked exactly like the rest of it, or at least that's the information I've got to work on. So I'm going to do something that makes it stand completely out different. I go to that 3. Let's say I'm still not getting bit. Okay, let's drop it down to 2.5. I picked up 1 or 2 here, but I'm still, I think they're more active than that. I think I should be getting more bites. Okay, drop it down to 2 inches. 2 inches, man, the bite is on fire now. Here I'm probably going to start playing with colors, see if that helps increase or decrease the bites. Or I might drop down to 1.5. If I drop down to 1.5 and all of a sudden I'm not catching as many as what I was on the 2, I'm going back to the 2-inch. Same kind of process with colors, guys. I'll start very natural and I'll start very bright in contrast. I'll see which one starts to hit first. Whichever one hits first, man, I'm going to start to kind of narrow it down from there. It's a game. You've got to experiment. You've got to play. color and size both. It doesn't matter whether it's 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, noon, 3 in the afternoon. It's constantly going to be changing. You're not going to be able to say, okay, I'm going to this lake, I'm going to get there at 6 a.m. I need to be throwing a 1.5 inch Money Milk, Bobby Garland, Slap Slayer or whatever. Because that might have worked that time. This next time you go, it might do okay, might do nothing. But odds of it being hot and the number one bait that them crappie are going to hit again, they're low to non-existent, guys. That's part of the fun of crappie fishing, is every time you're out there, it's a new challenge, a new adventure to see, hey, can I put the puzzle pieces together? Can I figure these fish out? And once you do, guys, and you start getting them bites, man, it's something, all right. There's no other type of fishing that quite equates to pulling crappie off a brush pile, just one after another after you've struggled for an hour, 2 hours, or however long to really figure out what the fish wanted and what they're going to bite best that day. When it clicks, man, you feel like you're on top of the world. Anyway, let's continue to get going on here, kind of going into rambling and whatnot. Y'all bear with me. I'm going to go refill my coffee, and then we'll come back and start the next section. Okay, guys, so as far as techniques to catch crappie, first thing, my favorite, so I might be biased when I say it's one of the most popular, but again, it's my favorite, so hey, it's my favorite. Single jig. This is typically done with a longer rod, and it's very much what it sounds like. You tie a single jig on the end of that pole, and you're dipping it either over brush piles, into brush in shallow water, things like that. As a matter of fact, guys, I've gotten to where I love fishing this way so much. I showed y'all earlier that little 7-foot combo that I got. My next rod and reel that I get will be a 9-foot jigging pole. I've gotten that far into it. I'm going to spend the money, not go crazy, but I'm going to get me a nice jigging pole. What's so great about it? Man, when it comes to timber or brush, you can get a jig right in there to where them crappie can be hiding. If any of you guys are bass fishermen as well, and you're used to like flipping and pitching into thick stuff, that's what single jigging is in the crappie world. Bass fishing, I love flipping a jig. I love that close quarters combat style deal. Crappie world, single jigging, that's the same thing. You know, I'm getting right up there, sneaking up onto that brush pile or sneaking up over that tree. I'm dropping my jig down. I'm playing, teasing them, boom, they're there. Half the time you don't have to reel. I mean, that's how shallow some of these fish are. You're pulling that sucker up, getting them in the boat. Hopefully he's 10 inches here in Texas. That's what he's got to be. Key, hoping he's 10 inches, because if so, he's going in the live well or on the stringer, and he's going home for dinner. Anyway, a lot of people use it. If you've ever seen people up on the bow of a bass boat or crappie boat, and they're looking down at a graph, and they got their pole in their hand, they're single jigging, guys. It's called video game fishing. What they're doing is they're watching that jig on their sonar. They're watching where the fish are. They're putting that jig right above them, and they're waiting for that fish to take it. It is a slower form of fishing, guys. If you're very much, we'll equate it to the bass fishing again. If you're one of these guys that you want to be throwing a crank or a jerk bait and just rip, and covering water, single jigging might not be for you. This is very meticulous. You're going to pick apart a tree or a brush pile or some grass or something like that that's been flooded. You're being very precise with where you're putting that jig in there. It's the benefits of it, but it is a slower technique, so you're not going to cover as much water doing this. Most people are going to consider this a boat-only technique, but guys, especially if you're fishing ponds or creeks, stuff like that, if you've got cattails or flooded brush or something like that, and you can get over them, take the old cane pole days. Get over, drop it down into that stuff, You can still catch a bunch of crappie that way. I've seen guys that'll wade through some shallow water and they'll single jig crappie out that way as well. So it doesn't just have to be a boat deal. Personally, I use it mainly as a boat deal, and most people would say it is a boat-only kind of technique. It is single jigging, but don't discount, just like I was saying earlier, spoons, guys. A lot of times I'll use a small spoon instead of a jig, especially if I'm in more open water. So this would be more situations where I'm sitting over a brush pile that I can't see. Maybe it's 15 foot of water, the brush is coming up 5 foot off the bottom, so I'm jigging that spoon 8 to 9 foot from the surface, just a foot or two above that brush, not actually getting down into it. Times like that, a spoon can work fantastic because, again, not a lot of people use them, so they're not seen as often by the fish. Next technique is going to be the drop shot. And so I steal this one from the bass fishing world. You've got your hook here and your weight's below it instead of weight being above it. This, you can use it with artificial baits if you want. This is primary. I use it for minnow fishing. The reason I use a drop shot rather than having my weight and then my hook is I can feel what that minnow's doing a little bit more, guys, and I can feel the bites better. I don't have that weight that's kind of acting as a buffer to where I don't see the bite right away with my rod tip or my line, or I can't feel it right away. By having that minnow or lure above the weight, the instant the crappie picks it up. Crappie are notorious for doing what's called a negative bite, and basically what that's going to be is they're going to be coming upwards when they feed. So if your minnow's sitting here and they come and pick it up, guys, that's not going to pull your line tight. That's actually going to put a little slack in it. A drop shot's an excellent way to still be able to feel that difference with the weight above the hook. Instead, a lot of times you don't feel it until that crappie's already let it go. It can be hard to get catches that way. The other thing, the drop shot, you can use that either in brush, cover, thick stuff like that, or you can use it as well in open water. It's really not a one or the other. As far as rods go for this, guys, use whatever you got. You can use a short one, you can use a long one, or anything in between. You're not going to need anything real specific as far as gear for using that. So it's an excellent way, pairing a minnow with a drop shot and just whatever rod and reel you have with some 6-pound test line. You're real easy to get out there and start experiencing crappie fishing. It's not something that you gotta be real concerned about your gear with. So now we're going to go into trolling and pulling, which same thing. But the reason I say trolling and pulling is this type of trolling is your traditional trolling. Your rods are typically cast out behind the boat. You're moving along forwards. Lures are behind you. You're dragging them. You're pulling them. This, a lot of people use a longer rod for, or multiple rods. I've seen a lot of people where, let's say they'll use 2 7-foots off the back of the boat, 2 7-foots just right up on the back side, or 2 8-foots right up along the back side after that, and then 2 10-foots in front of those on the side. And what that does is that keeps your lures, your 7s coming off the back, your 8s coming here, your 10s coming here. Same thing on this side, 7, 8, and 10. Keeps that space in them, keeps the lines from tangling up. If they were all 7-foot, these outside 2 would be lined right up against each other and swinging in. It'd be a tangled nightmare. Trust me, I know from experience. Hate to admit that, but I did not think that through, and that's a lesson I learned the hard way. So if you're trolling like that and you're going to use a bunch of different rods, you might want to vary up that. But trolling, you can use jigs, you can use spinners, you can use spoons, you can use live bait. Really doesn't matter. People use cranks. That's another real popular lure to be using when you're trolling with crappie. Speeds that you're moving when you're trolling, I'm going to say you're anywhere from half a mile to 2.5 miles an hour. More typically, I'm going to say between 1.25 and 2 miles an hour is where most people are going to sit. That's going to be something that's going to, it's going to vary like a lot of things. You're going to have to play. Some lakes you might typically troll faster, some lakes you might want to troll slower. Some days you might, depending on what the weather's doing, the season, what the fish want. A lot of this you've got to play with. You know, I'm not going to go in real detailed depth, but there is different ways you can control the depth of your jigs and stuff. For now, all I'm going to say is, you know, if you want it to run a little bit deeper, use a heavier jig or add a second jig onto that line. If you want it to run a little bit shallower, lighten it up or take a jig off. Maybe in a future video we can go into some more depth on that, but that would take quite a bit of explaining to do here today and kind of get too far off the topic, so we're not going to go detail there. A huge misconception with trolling is that it's easy, that it's cheating, that, you know, it's not really fishing, yada yada yada. And this isn't specific to crappie fishing, but we're talking about crappie, so I'm going to talk about crappie today. I want to address this, guys. Trolling is real fishing. It does take work. A lot of what you got to do with trolling isn't just throw your rods out, pick lures and throw them on them, sit back, drink beer and wait for the fish to bite. If you don't know why you're trolling through a specific creek channel or in a specific area of the lake, you shouldn't be trolling there. You don't just pick at random. You're looking for places that might hold fish that, okay, I've got this creek. Let's say it's starting to warm up. It's late spring. I don't know if they're still in the back of the creek or the front of the creek. I'm going to troll through this creek channel and see where they are. You know, if midway through you're getting bites, you're probably going to stop trolling the back of the creek and the mouth of the creek, and you're probably going to keep trolling right there in that middle where you were getting bites. And you zero in on it. A lot of times, especially me, I'll do something like that where I zero in on it. Once I know, hey, this 100-yard section of the creek or so is where the bites are coming from, I'll flip around to either a slip float or a single jig or something like that, and then I'm going to go back through and I'm going to pick those schools apart. Trolling, since the baits are moving, fish have to be real active to actually hit them. They have to be in an aggressive mood. Not all the time is that whole school in an aggressive mood, but generally there are one or two fish in a school that, man, they're rearing, gunning, they're ready to hit whatever comes by them. So once I find that one or two and I pick those off trolling, I'm going to go back there. I'm going to see what else is in that school. So this is going to be a great technique when fish are scattered, when they're not real tightly grouped up. You can really cover that water, and so you can pick them off while they are scattered. This doesn't have to be just in a creek. This doesn't just have to be out in the main lake, but you can look at bays, you can look at points, different things like that. Sometimes the area you troll might only be a couple 100 yards, and it's a lot of work to get set up for a troll that's that short, but it can be worth it. Sometimes you might be trolling a mile and a half long stretch. You never know. It kind of depends on the body of water you're in and what the fish are doing at that time. Alright, so since we entered the trolling world of things, let's talk about spider rigging or pushing jigs or whatever you want to call it, slow troll, anything like that. This is very similar to trolling and pulling jigs, except for these are typically going to be on the front of the boat with the boat moving forward, so you're pushing. Spider rig's the common name for it. You see these old guys, half the time they're sitting out with, looks like dozens of rods hanging off the front of their boat. That's spider rigging. Your speeds are a lot slower, anywhere from a quarter of a mile to no more than 1 mile an hour typically, maybe a mile and a quarter, maybe. You're slowed down. This is a little bit more finesse trolling deal. Instead of when you're trolling how your line kind of slants way back and then down into the water, spider rigging, you want to try to keep those lines vertical. You can rig one jig, one minnow, or multiple minnows and jigs on it. Typically, you do have some sort of a weight at the bottom of the line to keep that line vertical there for you. Like I was saying, it's a very finesse approach to the trolling. This lets you get in closer to brush and stuff, kind of maneuver around those trees, really pick things apart. most people are going to want as long of a rod as they can get a hold of or that they have and they can manage for this. The idea behind that is you want to get the bait out in front of the boat to where the crappie are seeing the baits before they're realizing the boat is there. Now, if all you have is, let's say, 7-foot rods again, don't let that stop you from giving this a try. It's a fantastic deal. As a matter of fact, I do semi-spider rigging, we'll call it. I'm pushing them like spider rigging, set up like spider rigging, but typically only 2 rods, not the dozen you see on the front of a boat, out of my kayak, and I'll put them right off the front of the kayak with 7-foot rods. It still works. Do you miss some fish that spook away? Yes, that's going to be the nature of that. A longer rod is going to be a little better suited for this, but don't let it stop you if that's something you don't have yet, but this is a technique that you want to try out. One of the greatest things, in my opinion, about spider rigging is it lets you test multiple different things all at once. And what I mean by that is you've got, let's say, all these rods sitting out in front of you. On this rod here, you can test a 10-foot depth. This one you could set to 8, this one you could set to, we'll say, 12, this one to 6. So you see what I'm saying, you really got the entire water column covered as far as it vertically goes. The other thing you can do is if you've got 2 at 6, 2 at 8, 2 at 10, yada 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 whatever, these 2 that are at 6, this can be a dark bait, this can be a light bait. These 2 at 8, same thing. Or you could do a live bait versus an artificial bait, so on and so forth. So you can really kind of play the experimenting game and test out a bunch of different things to figure out what's working best. As you find that bite, bring most of your rods up. I still typically would leave 1 or 2 that I'm constantly playing with, see if you can find a hotter bite. But, you know, if you've got 8 rods out, 6 of them are set and they're getting hit like nobody's business, and you're playing with these other 2 to see if anything else is working better, I promise you're not playing with those 2 very much, because those 6 rods there are keeping you busy. And that's a good day on the water. Real quick before we leave the trolling kind of world of things, I want to touch on something called side pulling. So this is very much like trolling or pulling jigs, except for guys will set up, they'll actually put the trolling motor off the side of their boat and cast their lines out the other side. And what this does is it gives you the length of the boat to set all your rods out, and you move the boat sideways rather than forwards or backwards and pull those baits. Again, this is just like your trolling or pulling. You're typically looking, 1 to 2.5 miles an hour. You can use whatever lure you can possibly conjure up that crappie would hit. It's a little bit more of a, I guess we'll call it niche kind of technique. So I personally haven't done it. I've seen people do it. I do know that it does have success. I just haven't done it myself, so I did want to mention it there. A lot of the characteristics from what I've seen are going to add up just like your regular trolling or pulling jigs, except for the motion of the boat and how you set the boat up with it. So let's talk about floats with crappie. Everybody knows a fixed float, you can put it out, do all that. Specifically, I want to talk about slip floats when I'm talking. Now, 9 times out of 10, if I'm saying slip float, so long as depths allow it, you can use a regular float. I just prefer a slip float. So, with that disclaimer in place, slip floats and crappie. Guys, your rod's going to be looking 6'6" to 7'6", something like that. Don't really sweat it too much. If you can cast it and you feel comfortable with it, it's a good rod for it. The benefit of this, I can cast a slip float with a jig on it 20 yards out that way, let that jig fall down, catch on the slip float, be fishing 15 foot deep off the bobber from 20 yards away. If fish are spooky, that fish has no clue that my boat's 20 yards away. I can catch those spooky fish. I can pick up more fish like that. I can control my depth just like when I'm jigging it. but I get the benefit of being able to cover water just like you're casting a lure. A lot of times with slip floats, I'll cast them out, let it sit, pop it in, reel a little slack, pop it in, reel a little slack. Make sure if you're targeting a brush pile, cast past it and bring it to that brush pile. Sometimes the plop, the splash, whatever you want to call it, of the float hitting the water is going to put those fish on alert. So you don't want it to be when they're alerted like that they first see your bait, because then that just throws red flags up that, hey, something ain't right about this. Other beautiful thing with slip floats, a lot of times I'm using a jig or a minnow. Really anything that you would jig or anything that you would cast, you can use. Now, I'm not going to advise crankbaits or spinners or anything like that, because there's not a whole lot of quick motion to really get those baits going. But if it's a bait that you would fish vertically, you can fish it under that slip float. Guys, especially in rivers and creeks and stuff like this, if that's the waters you're fishing, do not underestimate a slip float. Conditions like that, you can cast that puppy out, let it drift on down. You can fish a wide stretch of water searching for where the fish are with a slip float relatively quickly. Same things in lakes, except for you got to cast it and then pull it through. Moving water, you guys get lucky because the water will help kind of move it through, but I know that comes with its own challenges as well. Let's go to casting. So casting is exactly what it sounds like. If you've got a crankbait, a jig, a this, a that, whatever you got, even a minnow, simply cast it to a location, pull it in. The beauty of this is you really get to control the speed of a moving bait with your presentation. So you can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can stop it, let it fall a little bit. Another wonderful thing about it is, you're covering a lot of water. If I'm standing right here, I can cast here, I can cast here, I can cast, fan cast around the room, and I'm covering that whole area bit by bit by bit. I find fish here, okay, I'm going here. At that point, maybe I switch over to a slip float and I start targeting that specific spot. But that can be wonderful on days that it's hard to hold over a brush pile because of wind or boat traffic and wakes or anything like that. It can be awesome to be able to cast. A lot of times there, I'll drop a buoy and I'll cast out past that buoy and bring it back to it. So, hey, we're West Texas. A lot of times we got a lot of windy days. Sitting right over a brush pile might not be possible. Those buoys and casting out to it can be awesome. It's probably one of the simplest ways that you can just go out and fish for crappie. If you're not really that familiar with fishing or different styles of fishing in general. So don't overlook it. I know it seems simple and basic and everything, but sometimes keep it simple, stupid. That just works. Dock shooting is where you're typically going to see your shorter rods come into play. I'm talking anything 6'6" under. Dock shooting is a very specific technique. I don't have it set up. I'm going to explain it like garbage. So I'll try to move the chair and show you. Dock shooting, no, you wouldn't do it with a float on here, but you would open your bail, hold your line, bend the tip of the rod down by pulling on your line, and then when you let go of your line here, you're going to continue to hold it here and let the rod catapult that through. And once it starts to straighten back out, you release with this hand here. Break that down and make it real simple for you. All dock shooting is, guys, is you're using that pole to bend it, let go, fling that lure, and you're trying to keep it as low and close to the water to get it up under docks. Dock shooting. You can do this to get it up under tree branches, into holes in brush, things like that. This technique is kind of a specific deal. You're not going to see people doing it out in the open water just for the heck of it, and you're not going to see everybody knowing how to do it. But dock shooting is something that, man, middle of summer, you got this big boat dock that's just casting this huge shadow in the water, providing that refuge for crappie and all sorts of other fish. If you can take the time to practice and really master that, you can fling a jig or whatever else up under there, get it under there and just kind of let it drift and pendulum back. Nobody else is getting a lure back there. Let me repeat it again. Nobody else is getting a lure that far back into that dock. What that means for you is you're the only one fishing for those fish. And I promise you, those fish are just as hungry as the fish out in the heat. And honestly, they're more apt to eat because they're in cooler water that's shaded, that's more comfortable for them, so they're not as stressed out. When fish aren't as stressed out, they'll eat more readily. So hey, it's worth giving it a go. One thing I will say, when it comes to dock shooting, guys, once you get that lure out and you're letting it just kind of fall down on that slack line or semi-slack line, man, you have to watch your line. Watch it. I mean, just like an eagle. Because all you're going to see is just a little tick of that line. It's not going to be a lot most of the time. That little tick of the line, you want to set that hook. You've got your fish on. It's an awesome way. I'm not terribly great at it myself, but it's something I want to continue to progress with. It's fun, it's exciting, and it's a way to get to fish that nobody else can get to. So we're going to talk about different locations that you're going to be looking and fishing for crappie in. Guys, you're going to be looking for them in open water. Most of the time, you're looking either in summer or winter. If you're looking in real open water like main lake type areas, you're going to be looking for points, you're going to be looking for humps, you're going to be looking for old river channels, I guess you say, ledges and stuff like that, boulders, anything that sticks out a little bit abnormal structure-wise as compared to the rest of the lake. Main water, it can be great during the summer and winter. A lot of times that's your deeper water, so fish are going there to get down a little bit deeper, a little bit more stable water. It's not fluctuating in temperature so much. Then you've got the complete opposite. You've got creeks. We all know what creeks are. You know, they're coming off the lake, or it's a creek that you're fishing off a river or something like that. This water's typically a little bit shallower. Doesn't always have to be, and it can be extremely shallow. Here you normally see a lot more brush. You see a clear defined channel with just flooded rims of it. This, you know, in your transition periods, depending on where they are, anywhere from the mouth of that creek to the back of the creek. But 9 times out of 10, crappie are going to be in a creek somewhere. I mean, even, you know, we just talked about open water, but I mentioned points. Even during the summer, they might be off that main point that's the mouth of the creek. So is that open water or is that the creek? You know, you could really make the argument that crappie live their lives in creeks. It's an awesome place to troll. It's an awesome place to single jig when you've got the brush piles and things like that. Casting, when you get up into the back, the little coves and bays that get real shallow in springtime, you get into the spawning fish, it can be fantastic. So something else to be looking at when you're looking for locations for crappie. Trees and brush. Trees and brush, trees and brush. We'll add weeds in there because it's all the same thing. You're looking for cover, guys. Man, my favorite place to look for crappie is bridges, which we'll get to later, and trees. I love submerged trees, submerged timber, because 9 times out of 10 there's at least one crappie on it, and I can get in there and I can catch them with a single jig. Now, that doesn't mean that all times of the year these crappie are going to be down in that tree. That tree might only come up halfway through the water and the fish might be sitting 3 or 4 foot above it. But they're still going to relate to that cover on that structure, you know. So you got this creek channel that's coming out, it comes up over here, you got big old trees sitting right here, and then you got crappie are going to relate to that tree. You know, same thing with brush, same thing with weeds and weed lines. If you've got this massive field of weed coming off a creek channel and then it clears up and there's an isolated patch here, look around that isolated patch and look around that clear patch, right where it goes from clear to the heavy weeds there. Those can be fantastic places to find crappie. You control them areas, jig them again, however you want to do it, but those are great places to look. The next thing I'm going to talk about is bridges, rocks, concrete, boulders, anything like that. So if it's man-made or if it's a rock structure. If it's a rock structure, you're looking at it because, especially during the colder times of the year, if it's sunny and the water's fairly clear, some of that heat's going to get down, going to get to those rocks, going to warm them up, and that's going to be a little bit more comfortable place for the fish to be. Other than that, if there's no timber, brush, or trees, that's the closest thing to something different and cover structure related for the crappie to go to. Now, crappie by nature are going to go to brush, timber, or weeds before they go to rocks, but there's some lakes that you don't have a lot of the trees and brush and stuff, and mostly what you have is rock piles and things like that, so they'll relate to that. You've got to use your eyes, you've got to look around, see what's in your local body of water. Bridges. If there's a bridge, there's bridge pilings, there's crappie there all year, no matter what. There might be times a year that there's more crappie there and other times that there's very few crappie there, but you can always be safe betting that bridge pilings are going to hold crappie. Now, during the summer, they might be on the shaded side of them bridge pilings. In the winter, they might be on the sunny. You got to play that out, fish all the way around, think about where they are, recognize the little details. Same thing when you're fishing for crappie on flooded timber, guys. You know, if it's cold outside, cold time of the year, look to that sunny side. If it's hot outside, hot time of year, look to that shaded side. Little things like that can make a huge difference in the number of crappie you catch. Let's talk about crappie. Let's talk about kind of the times of year and how they move throughout the year and where you can expect to find them. Do you need to be looking for those trees and cover in shallow water and deep water? Where do you look on the lake? Because you'll find that stuff all around. So first off, 4 seasons, I break them all up into a few different separate categories because there's different things and transitions that go on. So if we start in spring, early spring, you've got pre-spawn that goes on. The fish are starting to get ready to spawn. They're going to start to be moving up a little bit. Spawn, man, most of the time they're shallow, they're nesting, they're bedding down, the males are guarding the fry, the females move back out, yada, yada, yada. Excellent time. A lot of crappie are caught this time. Most people are fishing crappie during spawn and the next little mini season post spawn. Post spawn's when they start to move back out, and I tell you the crappie are hungry. So if they're females, they're moving back out a little bit deeper. They're resting, recouping, but man, they're starved after spawning out and all of that. They're willing to eat just about anything. On the flip side, the males are still up shallow guarding the fry. The funny thing there is if you can find where they're nesting at in the crappie beds and all of that, you put anything, and I mean anything, even a bare silver hook across that bed right in front of that male's face, and he thinks you're going after the eggs or them fry, he's going to bite at it. He's not necessarily biting because he's hungry, but he's biting out of an attack, out of a protecting the eggs or the fry. So that can be an awesome time of year to get a lot of bites if you can find where they're spawning at. Again, a lot of times it's up shallower bays, coves, off of creeks. You know, springtime you're looking a little bit shallower. Then you get into summer. The 3 breakdowns I give there: transition into summer, you're in a summer pattern, and you're transitioning out. Real fancy terms, aren't they? So transitioning into summer, post spawn's kind of fading. These two overlap, but the males are coming off the beds too, and everything's kind of pulling out to a little bit deeper water, a little bit deeper structure and cover and everything. Things are heating up. You know, things kind of settle in at the calm period. They can scatter out. They can be in multiple different locations. Let's talk about that creek again. They're all in the back. They're all spawning. They move off, say, one creek bend or a couple feet for post spawn and whatnot. And then in this time, some of them might still be there, some of them might come a few feet deeper. I'm forgetting my words, guys, forgive me. And even beyond that, some are even pushing closer to the mouth of the creek. So this is a time that you really have to search for them. As they get into summer, you're looking at the mouths of the creeks, guys. You're still going to find some shallow. There's always going to be the exception to the rule. There'll be fish, they'll stay shallow all year long. They'll hide in the thickest cover you can find up shallow where it's nice and shady. But the bulk of the fish are going to come back out towards the mouth of that creek, out to the main lake kind of area, things like that, getting a little bit deeper, more stable water. Now, as temperature starts to drop back off and things like that, we're starting to get closer to fall. Here's how fall breaks down. You've got turnover, shad spawn, and late fall. So let's back up. We're transitioning out of summer and into the fall turnover. So temperatures are getting cooler. The fish will pull back up. Not really shallow into the creeks, but a little bit shallower than the mouths of the creek. And then all of a sudden you get turnover. And this is when the cool fall rains mix with the stale water that's been in the lake and heated up all summer, and it's going to turn all that water over, and it's going to reoxygenate everything. You're going to get rid of thermoclines, things like that. And thermocline's something that if anybody's interested in, put it in the comments and we can go over that. If no one's interested in it, we all know it, then I won't do a video on it, but it's going to be too much to explain here. But anyway, you get that turnover, and man, this is when those fish are going to kind of turn on. They're going to get active, kind of hanging out in that mid-creek area. But then what you're going to notice is you're going to see a lot of shad push into the backs of the creeks, the back of the coves, things like that. And what's going on there is the shad are coming in to spawn. And what that signals for a crappie is dinner time. You've got these massive schools of baitfish, shad, that are up in the backs of these coves and these creeks spawning. Well, there's no place for them to go. So the crappie follow them, guys, and they will push them right up against the shore and just gorge themselves one last time before winter. Then, unfortunately, the shad spawn eventually ends. It's done. The bite slows back down. We're into late fall. These fish are slowly going to start making their way back out towards that main lake area again. That brings us on down into winter. Winter I break down kind of the same as summer. The difference being is, during winter you're dealing with cold water. You guys up north, I'm sorry, your lakes freeze over. I don't know what kind of misery that must be. I'm not one for walking out on ice and trying to fish. Maybe one of these days I'll try it, but I like my lakes liquid, not solid. But for the rest of us that don't have an ice over or whatever them guys call it up there, your fish are going deeper. They're going to get less and less mobile. It's getting cold. Their metabolism's slowing down. They're not going to feed as actively or as aggressively. This is a great time to downsize. This is a great time of year for minnows. This one time of year that I'll fish minnows more than anything else. And it's simply because I personally have a hard time getting bites on jigs or crankbaits or anything like that. Even spoons sometimes can be real rough in the winter. So I'll downsize if I'm still not getting bit. I'm down to 1-inch baits and I'm not getting bit. Man, it's time to break the minnows out. I want to catch fish. I'm not out there to freeze my butt off. I'm out there to catch fish. That might sound cruel and impatient and all of that, but hey, that's the truth of it, guys. We all think about the weather and the seasons as far as air temperature. And guys, air temperature is one thing, water temperature is another thing. They're going to be a little bit different. Water temperature changes a little bit slower and more gradual. And yes, water temperature plays a role in what these fish do. But more importantly than that, and as people, we don't really observe it as much, but we all know summers you got these long late nights. It can be 9 o'clock and the sun's still out. Wintertime by 5 p.m. it's like, man, the sun's setting already. The daylight and the number of daylight hours in a day are more so what drives the crappie into these transitions, along with the water temperature and weather changes. So pay attention to when your days are getting longer, when they're getting shorter. That's going to help you kind of pick up on when these crappie are making these transitions as well. All right, so let's go ahead. Oh, I can't believe I'm going to do this one, guys. Oh, I'm going to make some people happy. I'm going to make some people sad. But let's talk about electronics with crappie fishing. I'm going to start off, and some of you probably going to click off this. No, you don't need electronics to be good at crappie fishing. You don't have to have live scope. You don't have to have a $1,000 fish finder. You don't have to have jack. Plain and simple. We were catching crappie just fine before all this. You don't have to have it now. So if that's what's holding you back, that's what's stopping you from trying to push yourself to be a better crappie angler, right now I'm telling you, quit it. Quit making excuses. Get out on the water. You can catch them without it. Now, are they nice to have? You betcha they're nice to have. I'm not fortunate enough to run real fancy units or anything like that. As a matter of fact, right now I'm working without a fish finder at all on my kayak, which is my primary means of fishing at the moment. Anyway, let's talk about them. You've got 2D sonar, you got down imaging sonar, side imaging sonar, and live sonar. Those are your four main types of electronics that you get into. 2D, we've all seen the little arches with the colors and all of that. That's what that is. Down imaging is basically that, but it takes all the colors and arches away and gives us a pretty picture. Side imaging, both of those, by the way, are looking under the boat, under the transducer where it's at. Now, side imaging gets in to be a little bit different, and if you can afford it and you're buying a fish finder, it can be amazing for crappie and finding brush piles and structures and things like that. What side imaging does is it looks to the side of the boat, you know, be it 40 foot on each side, 60, 20, whatever, however you set it, and it shows you the bottom, and then in the middle of the image it shows you the water column as well. But mainly side imaging, what you're looking at is you're looking at that bottom structure and where brush piles, rocks, debris, drop-offs, things like that are. Can be fantastic, especially if you pair it with some of the modern units that will allow you to do custom mapping and all of that at the same time. You can really get a detailed layout and idea of what's underneath the water on your lake. Live sonar, it's exactly what it is. You know, we've all heard live scope, active target, yada yada yada. They're all live sonar. It's the newest, biggest, baddest toy there is out there. Everybody's flipping out about it. It's taken the crappie industry by storm because people are absolutely loving it. And for good reason. I mean, it's a fantastic toy. You can see the fish as they're there. You can see them in real time moving. You can see your bait, all of that. What it does is it's looking a specific direction. You can set it multiple different ways. But it's looking a specific direction, say down and in front of your boat. You're standing there, you drop your jig, you can see your jig, you can see the brush pile, and you can see all the fish in real time swimming around the brush pile. You can really get your lure or bait right in front of the fish. You can watch that fish take it, and man, you can see that before you even feel it on your rod. It's awesome. But guys, I'm going to tell you right now, just because you can see the fish down there and you know you're putting your bait in their face, doesn't mean you're going to catch any more of them. If you've got the wrong bait down there, if it's the wrong time of year, if they're not crappie, it doesn't mean the fish are going to eat it just because you've got the fanciest toy out there. So if you do have access to that, it's great. Use it. You can learn a lot just by watching the fish about their behavior and how they react to different things. If you don't have it, don't beat yourself up and don't think that you can't catch fish because all these other guys have live scope and you don't. Backing up, let's talk about the 2D and the down imaging. When it comes to crappie fishing, the down imaging, I'm not a huge fan of. Some people like the look of it a little bit more, but if I'm going to look at that picture of the water and see that cone under the boat, I think there's a little bit more detail and information in looking at a 2D sonar. And the 2D sonar is really fantastic for crappie fishing. If you're sitting over a brush pile, you see the brush pile down here, and it's your lighter shades or whatever, depending on how your settings are, and you can see the fish come across as arches or lines, however, on your deal. You can also see your jig down there, or your minnow, or whatever you might be using. There's this little real-time graph on the side of it that's called the A-scope, and that actually is a live feed of what the sonar's returning at that instant, and that's used to paint that picture of your history for you. A lot of people will watch that A-scope in the history with their jig and the fish moving, and that's called video game fishing, where they're trying to use that to get it right to it. Can be fantastic. Guys, the other big electronic factor that I don't think a lot of us think about, just about all of us have access to, is maps, guys. The sonar stuff is cool, but your maps. I'm a nerd when it comes to fishing. I will spend hours looking at satellite images and topographical maps before I go on a fishing trip, trying to figure out where the best spots are, where the fish might be that time of year, what's the water doing in comparison to last year, things like that. You can find your points, you can find your humps, your ledges, you can look at the satellite maps, and especially if you go look at past years when maybe the lake was low or something, you can start to find brush piles and see what's kind of hidden under the shoreline there. All of those things can help give you ideas of places to start looking for fish. If all you have is access to internet, and let's say you have a cell phone, you have a cell phone, you probably have Google Maps on it, because most of us are carrying a smartphone. And if you have access to the internet, you have access to Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever different thing you want to use for a satellite map there. Look at those, study those before you go on the water. The other thing that not a lot of people realize you have access to is you can go to navionics.com. And navionics.com, I'll make sure to have it down in the description for you. From there, you can look at their chart viewer, and you can look at, it's a basic and not real detailed topographical map, but it's a map of most of the waterways here in the United States, that you can see your depth, your contours, so you don't have to have this fancy fish finder and pay $100 for a card, or this fancy fish finder and go map it out on your own or anything like that. You can get a good rough idea of what it's like and where the drop-offs and creek beds and stuff like that are for free. Highly, highly, highly recommend you use that. Once I started doing that, that's really kind of taken my fishing ability to another level by understanding the lay of the land, if you will, for each of the lakes that I go fish. Now, here's the deal. All of these electronics are expensive, and in all honesty, there's one other type. It's trolling motors. We've all seen them. We've all heard of them. They go from a couple $100 for a basic one all the way up to, I think, $4,000 or $5,000 nowadays for some of them. Maybe even more. Who knows? I'm too broke for all of that. But if you're on such a tight budget that you're looking at it and, okay, do I spend $1,000 on a fish finder or $1,000 on a trolling motor? Guys, get the trolling motor. I know the fish finders are cool and all of that, but the trolling motor gives you so much ability to control your boat, control your position of where you place that lure, and I promise you 9 times out of 10, that's more important than looking at the image on your fish finder. Fish finders, again, they're great tools. I'm not against them. Trust me, once it's in the budget, I'll be getting one set up. Hoping to get a boat again soon and get one set up there as well, if not 2. So definitely use them if you can. But the trolling motor, it allows you to stay in the place that you need to be in to catch those fish. I don't care if you can see them on a fish finder if you can't stay on them and get your bait to them. And that's what the trolling motor allows you to do. Real quick, guys, I want to give you a breakdown. No, we're not going to get into that. if when it comes to sonar and the 2D imaging and all of that, or any of the sonar stuff, guys, if that's something y'all want to know more detail about, y'all want to learn more about, you want me to go over kind of what your cone angle is, what you're seeing, how to read it, how to determine what's going on, go ahead, let me know in the comments. If there's some interest in that, then hey, I'll take the time out. We'll sit down, we'll do a video. I'll get some graphics up. We'll do all of that. That is stuff I have experience with. I'm just currently not using. But today, I'm not going to dive too much into that. But that's what it is, guys. Keep it simple. You don't have to have all the fancy electronics to go out there and catch fish. You don't have to have the nicest gear, the nicest equipment. You ain't got to break the bank. You want to be a better crappie angler? Start studying the fish, start paying attention to patterns, try to change things up a little bit, whether it's size, color, the lure you're using, this, that, the other, where you're throwing it at, how you're throwing it, all of that. But go have fun, go get on the water, because again, if you're not on the water, you can't catch them, you can't get better. Hopefully, by now, I've told you at least one thing that you haven't known. If you've made it this far into the video, you've watched the whole thing, you are doing fantastic, guys. Thank you for the support. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to a redneck like me ramble and try to share some valuable information with you. If you are getting value out of this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. That's going to let you know when I put videos up. It's also what it's going to do for me is it's a huge help and support to the channel, because not only does it grow that and YouTube looks at all those, but it tells me that, hey, what I'm doing is helping people out, and that's what I want to do here. I want to make sure that, yes, I want to entertain you with some of the trips that we go out, but I want to, when I do a video like this, I want to know that I'm giving you the information that you find valuable and what's helping you. So guys, until next time, y'all stay safe and tie lines.